In collectivism, the government owns the means of production. In capitalism, the citizens own the means of production. In fascism, the citizens own the means of production, but the government controls it. This is simplified, obviously, but sums it up well. I'm the Philosopher King 2.0. In this video, I'm going to apply these distinctions to what we've learned in the Twitter files. You will have gotten the distinct impression that I don't have a high regard for left-wing ideologies. I don't. I know my history too well. The amount of blood shed by collectivists could drown the world several times over. And that's if we only count the examples where no one doubts that it was leftist perpetrators, Lenin, Stalin, Mao, Pol Pot, to name the well-known examples. But if you study the Nazis, the National Socialists, you'd understand that fascism is a creature of the left, not the right. Just look at the National Socialists' 25-point program of 1920. This is a left-wing document, if ever there was one. Please forgive me, but I really, really hate systems that murder tens, if not hundreds of millions of people. It's a personal failing of mine, I admit. Now, today's liberals and progressives, for obvious reasons, don't want to be associated with the Nazis. So they not only dispute Hitler's left-wing collectivist viewpoints, they accuse the right of being fascist. The Twitter files help us see just who the fascists really are. These files illustrate very well the old adage, scratch a liberal and a fascist bleeds. It is undeniable that the pre-Elon Musk Twitter was filled from top to bottom with leftists. It is undeniable that these leftists conspired together and, this is important, with the U.S. government to suppress the First Amendment protected speech of conservatives and, of course, Trump. Although it's been alluded to, I expect soon we will hear more about how they also suppressed the speech of people who dissented from the COVID lockdowns and so on. This is more related than you might think, because questioning the handling of COVID isn't just doubting the leftists' sacred cows, it is doubting the government itself. You see, they are one and the same according to their mindset. I'll return to this later. What the Twitter files show is not merely that a private company was exercising its own rights and privileges to conduct business according to its own principles, but that it did so in concert and collusion with important elements, if not whole agencies, within the U.S. government. In other words, what you see is a straight-up illustration of the idea that, in fascism, corporations are privately owned but government controlled. Twitter was privately owned, yes, but it was being controlled by the government. This is actual fascism. We might call it soft fascism, since the people at Twitter were acting more or less according to their own whims, but in coordination with the U.S. government. However, there's ample evidence that the U.S. government, at least numerous individuals within it, were exerting actual pressure on Twitter. If evidence surfaces that actual threats were made to Twitter, then we are talking about hard fascism. The government was controlling Twitter via coercion in that scenario. We know at least that many leftist politicians were publicly implying that Twitter should do their bidding or else. It does not seem that these threats needed to be formalized, and thus officially becoming fascist in nature, if only because it appears that the folks at Twitter not only acted voluntarily, but acted with glee. But the story isn't confined to Twitter. You will recall that at the same time, Parler was shut down. I bet if we hear the backstory on that, we will hear how the government instigated or encouraged that as well. Probably the folks at Amazon were equally gleeful, but nonetheless, this cooperation with the government to suppress and eliminate perceived rivals is very worrisome. In a word, chilling. We should ask why it is that Trump and conservatives were, and are, considered a threat to the government, given the fact that conservatives have stayed more or less the same. This is kind of built into their name, and they were never before considered to be such a threat. The answer to this is extremely important. The Philosopher Kings should take note. However, it would take a much longer video to explain it all. In a nutshell, what has happened is that leftists today cannot imagine a world that is not micromanaged by the government, and they think every dollar in the world should be confiscated and used for that purpose. They think you are selfish if you disagree, and worse. This notion might make your blood run cold, but they love that idea. Not too long ago, we all saw a barrage of ads screaming, "We're all in this together." Whenever a leftist saw this slogan, they went into orgasm. It didn't matter where they were or what they were doing, which is ironic because in their minds the only exceptions to their own rule, and even these rules are very narrow and must be contextualized, have to do with sex and drug use. Other than in these areas, leftists believe that all of our greatest goods should be transmitted through the government. Leftists believe, and I quote, "Government is simply the name we give to the things we choose to do together." And leftists believe we should do all things together. All this being the case, leftists see themselves and the government as basically one and the same. So they cannot help but view objections to their viewpoints as anything but treason. Much of the government is populated by the same sort of people. So when citizens object to how they are being governed, say being trapped in their own houses indefinitely and having their businesses closed, this too is viewed as treason. So much for self-government, right? That whole idea of our government being by the people and for the people, nope, it's by leftists for leftists. And that, my friends, is fascism. The Twitter files show raw, embryonic, actual fascism in development. If Twitter was not actually controlled by the government, it was only because the people who work there, and Facebook and Google and YouTube, are all more than happy to do the bidding of those in the government who don't need to be ordered to do anything. After all, they are the same people. The Republicans, as I have said several times, have their problems too. The difference, however, is that there is no chance the Republicans are going to throw you in jail if you disagree with them. But there is growing evidence that the Democrats find themselves literally aroused at the prospect. Be careful out there. This is the Philosopher King 2.0, and I have spoken. Like and subscribe and hit the notification bell.